What happened here 190 years ago impacted the lives of thousands and reverberated through generations. On a December morning in 1835, 180 members of the Seminole Nation, defending their land and their right to be free, watched in hiding as over 100 U.S. soldiers marched through these Florida pines. The clash that happened here sent shockwaves throughout the country, ignited the longest and costliest Indian War in American history, and set the stage for a story of remarkable resistance and resilience. Yet today, few Americans have ever heard this story. You're watching Journeys Through History, where we explore the places where the history happened and reveal the histories that are hidden in plain sight. Please subscribe to the channel, and as always, we encourage comments and welcome viewer suggestions for future episodes. The Dade Battlefield State Park in Bushnell, Florida, is a small, quiet preserve, a short drive from the hectic traffic of Interstate 75, about 50 miles north of Tampa. I can't tell you the number of times I've driven past the Dade Battlefield sign on the interstate as I sped along my way to Tampa or Tallahassee and points further north. I've wondered, but I'd not stopped. Finally, my curiosity got the better of me, and my visit opened my eyes to a significant part of American, Florida, and Seminole history and heritage. Listed on the National Register of Historic Places, this smallish state park, only about 80 acres, features the historic battlefield, a highly informative visitor center, a nature trail that wanders through 40 acres of pine flatwoods, a playground, recreation hall, and picnic area with covered pavilions. It would be easy to enjoy the natural beauty of the park, to picnic, or to take a short hike without engaging the history. But the deeper value here is learning about the event and beginning a journey to learn more about the Seminole people and the story of Florida. The story of this place begins with the arrival of indigenous people thousands of years ago. Over time, the Seminole people established themselves in the Florida wilderness. After the arrival of Europeans in the 16th century, the region, now known as Florida, changed hands multiple times between the Spanish, British, and eventually the United States. Over time, the Spanish Florida territory south of the newly formed British colonies became a safe haven for people who escaped slavery and sought refuge among the pines, palmettos, and Seminole people. Tensions between the Seminoles and the United States began as early as 1812. When the Spanish ceded the Florida territory to the United States in 1821, the U.S. immediately began a series of campaigns aimed at constraining and controlling Seminole lands. U.S. Army officials pressured Seminole leaders to sign the Treaty of Moultrie Creek in 1823. This controversial treaty, later nullified and never fulfilled, forced Seminoles to a small reservation. The majority of Seminole leaders rejected the treaty, citing it as unjust. The Treaty of Moultrie Creek highlights the U.S. government's deep misunderstanding of indigenous groups in Florida. Rather than a unified Seminole nation, the region was home to many distinct bands, each with its own leadership. Those who signed the treaty did so in an effort to hold on to what land they could, but the treaty ultimately worked against them, and those who signed were among the first to be removed to what is now known as Oklahoma, following the Indian Removal Act of 1830. In the 1820s, to enforce the Treaty of Moultrie Creek, the United States began to establish a number of forts in the Florida territory to put pressure on Seminoles, disrupt their movement, and effectively force them to a smaller geographic area. These forts gave the U.S. an increased military presence needed to capture, detain, and deport Seminoles west. These forts were liberally spread throughout the territory, forcing Seminoles further south and inland. Among these forts, and important to our story, is Fort Brooke, established in 1824 and located in what today is downtown Tampa. Fort King, in present-day Ocala, was officially established in 1827. The dirt road connecting the two forts is known as the Fort King Road. In May 1832, the Treaty of Payne's Landing required the Seminoles to give up their Florida lands within 3 years and move west. Some did so, but other Seminoles refused to recognize the treaty and fled into the Florida Everglades. Others remained in regions of central and southwest Florida. Seminole leaders such as Osceola, Micanopah, and Alligator began to plan their resistance to removal. In 1835, Seminole leaders began to recruit enslaved persons on plantations near St. Augustine. This led to a fateful decision by plantation owner and U.S. Army General Duncan L. Clinch. To protect his own plantation, he ordered the construction of Fort Drane, about 20 miles northwest of Fort King. Clinch redeployed soldiers and resources from Fort King to the newly established Fort Drane. This significantly weakened Fort King's defenses. As a result, General Clinch ordered reinforcements from Fort Brooke to Fort King, unaware that he was sending these troops into a deadly Seminole ambush. With increasing Seminole raids and skirmishes in December of 1835, the Florida air crackled with the tension of potential conflict. As you follow the Park Trail, imagine Major Francis Dade and more than 100 U.S. soldiers marching this same ground. They were making their way from Fort Brooke to Fort King. They were 5 days into the 100-plus mile march. Unseen in the brush, 180 Seminole warriors, including Black Seminoles and Seminole leaders Micanopah, Alligator, and Jumper, were waiting. Major Dade had expected Seminole attacks earlier in the march, especially further south at the more open areas of river crossing. By now, he let his guard down. Private Ransom Clark, one of only 2 survivors of the attack, later reported, "A moment before we were surprised. Major Dade said to us, 'We have now got through all danger. Keep up good heart, and when we get to Fort King, I'll give you 3 days for Christmas.'" Shortly thereafter, a single musket shot rang out, and Major Dade fell to the ground, instantly killed by the opening fire from Seminole Chief Micanopah. Micanopah's shot was both deadly and the signal to his warriors to begin the attack. The trail at the state park, now filled with thick undergrowth, pines, palms, and oaks, a beautiful scenic path through Florida nature, belies the chaotic and bloody scene from 1835. Rising from the palmettos and revealing themselves from behind the pines, the Seminoles opened fire. In the first moments, nearly half the 108 U.S. troops lay dead or mortally wounded. Surprised, confused, and overwhelmed, the U.S. troops fell back and attempted to regroup. Many of the Seminoles, feeling their surprise attack already marked a great victory, retreated into the wilderness, giving pause to the bloodshed. The few remaining U.S. troops hastily constructed a log redoubt, not realizing that their 3-sided defensive structure functioned as little more than a split-rail fence and boxed them into a situation that made the remaining soldiers easier targets for further Seminole attack. The fighting lasted for about 4 hours. By early afternoon, all but 3 U.S. soldiers were killed. Only 2 of those survivors made it back to Fort Brooke to tell their side of the story. It would be 7 weeks before a detail of U.S. troops visited the site to recover and bury the remains of those who fell on December 28th. The story filled newspapers throughout the United States, and it was called the Dade Massacre. It fueled further U.S. violent retaliation against Native Americans. For the Seminoles, it was a great victory and a bold act of resistance. Of the 180 Seminole warriors, only 3 perished. The long-planned tactics of guerrilla warfare and territorial knowledge served the Seminoles well. Along the trail, the landscape itself tells part of the story. Saw palmetto offered concealment. Pine flatwoods provided narrow corridors of movement. Streams and hammocks became hiding places. Every tree here was part of the Seminoles' defense. Historian Frank Laumer wrote, "The Seminoles had a great advantage. They knew the land, and they knew what they were fighting for." Walking here, that truth is impossible to miss. The Dade Battle marked the beginning of 7 years of brutal conflict. From 1835 to 1842, U.S. forces poured into Florida. At one point, nearly half of the U.S. Army was stationed in the territory. The war cost the U.S. more than $20 million, the most expensive conflict fought by the U.S. against Native peoples. It also cost thousands of lives, soldiers, settlers, and Seminoles alike. Seminole historian and archaeologist Deanna Butler writes that for the Seminoles, the Seminole War period is an incredibly traumatizing and painful part of Seminole history, one that reverberates to this day. It is important to recognize and acknowledge the Seminole perspective in this history, and not just those highlighted in history books. The factors that led to the Seminole Wars were numerous, but at its core, it was the active campaign of the United States against indigenous peoples of the Southeast. By the end of the Second Seminole War in 1842, more than 3,000 Seminoles were killed or abducted. The remaining Seminoles were whittled down to mere hundreds by the end of the Third and final Seminole War in 1858. Despite overwhelming force, the U.S. never truly defeated the Seminoles. Many were removed west to modern-day Oklahoma, but a small band resisted deep in the Everglades, and their descendants remain in Florida today. The Dade Battlefield State Park doesn't just preserve history, it invites reflection. The Dade Battle was more than a clash between soldiers and warriors. It was about a people's refusal to be driven from their homeland. The Seminoles' alliance with Black Seminoles made their stand even more powerful and even more threatening to a United States government built on slavery and on the verge of expansion. A visit to Dade Battlefield State Park allows for a look at history through new eyes, a chance to reflect on the United States' position and those who fell here, but just as importantly, on the Seminole story of resistance and resilience. A story that is still playing out today. While the highway signs, markers, and park entrance clearly identify this place, the events and long-term effects of the Dade Battlefield have become part of a history that is hidden in plain sight. This is Journeys Through History. Thanks for watching. I hope you subscribe to our channel and suggest future locations to visit and explore.